Here we are back with our original model, completed as we left it when we finished the high resolution details. Now we're going to be focusing on retopologizing and creating our low poly geometry with UVs so that we can start baking information from this model to a new version of the model with lower poly count. Now, one thing to keep in consideration, despite the fact that we're going for a lower poly count to get into Unreal, we're not we have to again remind ourselves what the purposes of this exercise in this course is. It's to get this into Unreal and match our content. So we're looking to get this pose, get the dynamicism of it, and capture all the fidelity and details using different methodology for a pipeline that is conducive for making hair, hard surface, organics, everything we went over the first chapter. So the reason I bring this up is because we're trying to capture a low poly model, but we're not looking to get to a certain poly count. And I want to emphasize that we're not trying to get this into a game, or we're not producing this for production pipeline to go into a real-time gaming scenario. So if we were, we would definitely be targeting a much lower poly count than we're going to be achieving for this model. We're going to be more than likely, way above the normal count of what I would consider a hero model for gaming and current generation consoles or PC gaming. We're looking at, you could have hero characters with a couple 100,000 polys, not excluding the hair cards and a lot of other, details that go into the models will easily make the character jump another 100,000 polys, depending on, like I said, the fidelity and what, console or PC specs we're targeting. So I say that because we're going to be utilizing levels of geometry that aren't necessarily the absolute lowest. We're going to have a pretty high poly count model, but we're not going to obviously have, we've got 150 million points here, which means our model is extremely high. So we're not going to be exporting that. We'll be exporting the details or the high-res versions of this model for the sake or purpose of baking, but we will not be trying to achieve a poly count that's going to, get us overthinking exactly what we're trying to do. So, like I said, we're going to be more than likely exporting pieces because we want to get things in fast and quick and start, get into textures and get into materials and Unreal and posing. That's the goal. All right. So with all that out of the way, let's start looking at all the armor pieces, because one of the main reasons, like I said, I brought it up before, is the reason we did a lot of remeshing and projecting was so that we could find a low poly form of each model that we could possibly export with UVs already on it. So that's why I typically, aside from the fact of also trying to use noisemaker or apply surface noise, which is needs to have UVs on your geometry. The same thing with adding IMM brushes or curve brushes that have texture detail or have UVs on them. The only way you can do that, again, is if you have UVs on your model that you're actually placing the IMM or curves brush on. This model specifically, this shoulder pad, I UV mapped earlier for those purposes that I could place the bolt, but because I did that, I also now have UVs for this model. So I'm at the lowest form of the model right now, which is subdivision level 1. Here's my geometry. I'm gonna hit morph UV. I've got UVs. These are them. They're set. So now I can bring this back, bring up my geometry. So that means I won't have to go through the process of, drawing all my polys on this model. So let's right now, before we go into Maya and before we start doing real retopologizing, like we're going to have to do for the jacket, for the ornamenting on the jacket, for pieces like this thigh armor, as well as some other pieces. Another one is this nice little hair clip, this winged hair clip. That's another piece we're going to have to add. We're going to have to do our own, a custom retopology. And like I said, we're going to do that in Maya by making surfaces live. We'll get there. So before we go there, I want to go ahead and take care of all the geometry that I know I can just do quick UVs on in here, and thus alleviate having to do all that in mine. So this model is set up for that. This one is as well too. I'm just going to go from one arm to the next, and we can start seeing which ones don't or which ones do, and consider, you know, taking it to UV Master. So again, like I said, we have UVs here on this one. You can always see they're flat, you know, what they look like. It's funny how it morphs them in 3D space, but this is essentially what that looks like. We're going to morph it back. We also have, okay, here's a big piece. This is what we spent a lot of time on, refining and getting down to the perfect point. So let's think about this. Let's go ahead and work on a clone. I like the polygroups that we have here. We worked really hard on achieving these. I'm going to bring this down to the lowest subdivision level. Again, polygroups came out really good. I got to look back at this. This is exactly what you want to achieve when it comes to using polygroups to your benefit to create great hard surface details. Let's go back to UV Master, work on a clone, and let's adjust our polygroups here to create a better UV shelf or UV reference for us to split up. I'll actually readjust the polygroup so that we can make the UVs work to our benefit. Since we're clearly only going to see this part of the model, the most detailed part, and we're not going to see this area, I'm actually going to put a seam, or try to put a seam, either behind this little edge lip here, or perhaps straight down the middle here in the front. Trying to think, like, what's the best way? We're going to see the armor. She has her arm this way, so maybe we keep it on the bottom end, like right here. Let's try to do that. Okay. Let's isolate this piece and that one. Okay. Now, let's make this all one piece. Let's make this one UV, one big island. And what I can do from here, let's go to our UV master. I'll enable painting. I'm going to try to paint a seam right down this side here. Let's go to attract. I'm just going to paint right down this edge. So we could either put one right there or straight down the middle here. Try to think what's the smartest way to do this and prevent us from ever having any views. You know, maybe we just put it on the middle. Let's just try this out. I'm curious to see what kind of results we get. Okay, we just did an autosave. Now let's do an unwrap. Let's flatten. And it did exactly what we wanted. Let's check the seams. Seam is exactly where we placed it. You know, results like this, you know, really make the whole idea of using UV Master a real joy, because of how effortless sometimes these results can be. It even gave us a seam here, which is really beneficial to really flatten things out a bit more. Consider we have like an inner edge loop. A lot of times if you have an inner edge loop like this, you're going to have problems with how it separates, especially when you have something like points or cones that, you know, have concavity or peaks in them. So once again, I'm going to take a look at the flattened version of this and try to decide if that's exactly what we want to do. I think we'll keep it. Because again, like I said, I'm trying to think about how it's going to be. Your arm's going to be like this. And I think that's an ideal area for a seam. All right. With these results, I'm going to come over to, oops. Hope it didn't. Yeah, okay. All right, we'll unflatten. We'll copy UVs. Come over to our model here. Paste UVs. Come over to UVs down here, and there they are. You can always check when you come down to your UV map menu. If it says morph UV and you have these options open, that's because your model has UVs on it. For the sake of being sure, let's morph UVs. And there we go. A thing of beauty. Now I can move on to the next object. Let's work on this one. Okay. Same process. Work on clone. I think what I want to do is, this object is actually hidden, most of it's hidden under the bottom of the other one. So the one above it. Let's see what we have. Let's go back and see what we're missing here. So it cuts off about right here. Okay, yeah, we're fine with capping in the middle and the bottom. All right. Do that. This. Make this all one polygroup. And an ideal point or an ideal position for us to have a UV seam with this model is going to be along the bottom here as well. Let's go with that. Let's create a seam along the inner part of the forearm.